And as this case rolled along, I became more and more concerned about the interagency relationships between the two prosecutors and the various police officials. When the task force was reactivated in 2005, everybody was there. I was introduced to Sergeant Gray, who was going to be the task force leader. There were police officers there from Ferndale and Berkeley and Birmingham and the Oakland County Sheriff, and I think other communities involved in which I didn't know them. And it was a big, happy family. Then when the Lamborghini case came up, Sergeant Williams from Livonia was involved, and again I was encouraged because Wayne County had a pedophile ring in Cass Avenue, and they were trying to find out if there's any relationship between a possible pedophile ring in Oakland County. And they were expanding the coverage, and I was very pleased, as Kathy and Chris have told you, or will tell you, about Sergeant Williams' participation in the case. And we could see that it was expanding. But when we got to the October 27th meeting, with the task force, I noticed there was nobody there from the 4 communities in which the kids lived, in the 3 Oakland County communities where their bodies were found, or the Oakland County Sheriff. And that just kind of surprised me, and I prepared a memorandum about that at some point in time and expressed that concern. And as you followed things through March the 1st, 1910, you can get a different picture. And at that meeting in October of 2009, Sergeant Williams had just retired from the Livonia Police Department, and he was hired as an inspector by Prosecutor Worthy in Wayne County starting the 1st of January. And she must have thought well of him, because at the same time she was terminating prosecutors for lack of funds. And then in December of 2010, when we get the Michigan State Police reports, we see entries in the Michigan State Police reports about getting rid of Williams. You could almost hear Gray laughing out loud about the fact that we finally got rid of him. What happened in those 2 months? I don't know. Don't know to this day. But that was the beginning of my concerns about deterioration between the various parties. Then, and this was confirmed by Lieutenant Miller when I talked with him, at the end of 2009 and the beginning of 2010, the center of the investigation seemed to move from Detroit to Pontiac. And the Oakland County people were forming a task force. We already had one in existence, and I don't think they'd treat them the same. And the Michigan State Police seemed to be working more with Oakland County than they had been with Wayne County. And that disturbed me. I think these people should talk to each other all the time. And then when I get the Michigan State Police reports, I see an entry on July 14th of 2010, in which Livonia sent an email to Sergeant Gray and said, "We understand there's more lab reports available. Could we take a look at them?" Gray sends an email to his superior, Lieutenant Hill, and then makes an entry saying, "We're not going to share the lab reports because we don't have the results yet," or everything. So Livonia, who had the lead on this case for a long time, is being shut out by Oakland County. And then I'm told that Cooper stopped talking to Worthy. Wouldn't return her calls, wouldn't talk to her, And as far as I know, that's been true for at least 2 years and maybe longer. Why did the communication stop? Worthy had even endorsed Cooper and gone public about getting her elected. Then in July of 2011, when I meet with Prosecutor Cooper outside the grand jury room for the 5 or 10 minutes, one of the questions I asked her was, why are there 2 grand juries? Because at that point in time, the public had gone public in the papers that both Oakland and Wayne County had grand juries going. And her comment to me was, because Kim Worthy wants to be governor. Now, do I have a political problem, a control problem, or a criminal problem? The only reason to investigate these murders is because it's a criminal problem. And I don't care whether Sergeant Williams, Sergeant Gray, Lieutenant Miller, or any other cop solves the case, I'll be extremely pleased. And, cops solve cases, prosecutors don't. Prosecutors always get up front on the stage, but the people who really belong there are the investigating officers. And then we had another thing come to my attention this year, which indicated people were not sharing information. When we talked about the blue gremlin, Chris covered in part the information we got from Doug Wilson. And if I hadn't married my present wife, Janice, we wouldn't know who Doug Wilson is. Reflecting on, you'll recall that she knew somebody who had been hypnotized in regard to the murder of Tim. She knew his first name was Doug. She knew that he worked with her deceased first husband in the car designer business. So if anybody knew cars, it's this guy Doug. She made several phone calls and finally traced him down to a fellow named Doug Wilson in California. And I called him up and talked to him. And he told me an interesting story to review a little bit about what you've heard. He was up to the store the night Tim was kidnapped, saw Tim, saw a young man and an old man, and was hypnotized by the FBI and gave them some substantial information, including the fact that there was a Le Mans there and he didn't see any blue gremlin. Well, that was of interest to us, and when Channel 7 went public with it, Corey Williams in Wayne County called me up and said, "What's this all about?" And I said, "Corey, if I hadn't married Janice, we wouldn't know anything about this." And then in November last year, when I get the response from the Oakland County prosecutor, what's in the file? The report where Doug Wilson, Lieutenant Kalbfleisch from Birmingham, and the FBI all met and went through this story that confirmed everything Doug Wilson had told me. So that information is sitting in the Oakland County prosecutor's file. It's sitting in the Michigan State Police or the Oakland County Sheriff's file, and Wayne County doesn't know anything about Doug Wilson. I do know on a couple of occasions, Rob Moran has told me they were trying to reestablish relationships with Oakland County. As far as I know, that's not been successful yet, but even the last time they were out here, he was very hopeful that we could reestablish that. And in all of my recent TV interviews, the question usually at the end of the interview is, "What do you want done, Mr. King?" And my answer has been consistent. I want all of these people to sit down in one room, summarize all the facts, and either tell me yes, no, or maybe about the Bush involvement and the Gunnels involvement. instead of everybody running off hoping their picture is going to be on the cover page of Time magazine because they solved the case. And because they don't want somebody else's name on the front page of the Free Press or the news. Mark's classmate, Cheryl Schubeck, called me about a year ago, said that she had attended a function where Brooks Patterson had spoken, and at the end of the presentation, she went up to him and asked him about the Oakland County child killer case. And Brooks told her that they were still working on it. The next week, he was going to meet with Bill Schuette, our Michigan Attorney General and the chief guy in Michigan on law enforcement and perhaps even the judiciary outside of the Supreme Court. And hopefully they could talk to somebody and get something done. Nothing came of that. When I talked with Lieutenant Miller and said he ought to be talking with Corey Williams, nothing came of that. It's a waste of taxpayer money to have two major agencies doing all this. Until Jessica Cooper took over, Wayne County was bearing most of the financial burden. They're the ones that flew up to the Upper Peninsula to talk to Gunnels, flew out to Montana to talk to Gunnels, and went down to Georgia and Alabama to interview these two people. My fond hope would be that all of them could sit down in one room, have somebody appointed chairman, hear everybody's story, and decide what to do. And the fact that Bush is dead should not be the controlling feature of whether he's a person of interest or not. This week in Oakland County, we've all read the story about the Birmingham teacher who was killed out in Franklin, and he was killed by his roommate, some guy from Royal Oak, who committed suicide, and that case is closed. We got a victim. We got a culprit who committed suicide, and they're not going to keep the case open. And 3 or 4 times a year we read in the paper that there's a spousal murder-suicide. One spouse is murdered, the other spouse commits suicide, the case is closed. Now, they can't try each other, but if there is no procedure right now in law enforcement to close a case when you think the guy is dead, then the legislature ought to take over and provide for rules in that regard. This guy killed his spouse. The case is closed. We don't have to keep an open murder case on this just because we can't charge somebody. And I would urge all of the law enforcement people and both of the prosecutorial staffs to swallow a little bit of humility and sit down with each other and share information. I've been in the business for 50 years, and every time we go to court, two sides don't agree on something, and there's a resolution. And it might be the right one or the wrong one, but at least there's a resolution, and there's something ought to be done on this so that one guy doesn't say, Bob doesn't say it's so-and-so, and that somebody doesn't say it's Bush, and that somebody doesn't say it's Gunnels, and somebody doesn't say it's Sloan. I just want something to be done about that, and I think it has to start at the top. I think either the legislature should take over or Bill Schuette.